crisp wind rustled through the Cascade foothills the day they opened the gate. Cedar, the young bobcat they had raised, healed, and prepared for freedom, was finally released to the wild. It was supposed to be the end of his story. But 3 months later, Cedar had returned, thinner but clearly homesick for the place he knew. He had traveled countless miles through dangerous wilderness to return to the only place he'd ever known. Most wild animals fight for freedom, but this bobcat fought to come back his enclosure. Why would a creature born for the wild choose captivity? What unfolds next will redefine the meaning of freedom and the true meaning of home. Before we start, hit the like button and make sure to subscribe if you haven't, and hit that notification bell so that you won't miss any new stories. The autumn air in the foothills of the Cascade Mountains had a particular bite to it that year, a crisp promise of the harsh winter to come. For Elara Vance, it was a scent she'd known for 67 years, a fragrance tied to the rhythm of life and loss that defined her existence at the Blackwood Creek Wildlife Sanctuary. The sanctuary wasn't just her job, it was a penance, a memorial, and a reason to get up in the morning. It was built on land her late husband, Tom, had cherished, and every rescued hawk, every orphaned fawn, was a continuation of a conversation cut short by a heart that had simply worked too hard for too long. The call came on a Tuesday, the sky the color of a bruised plum. A young man, his voice trembling with a mixture of fear and pity, reported a bobcat on the side of Highway 2, just past the old lumber mill. It had been hit by a car.
"It's still breathing, ma'am."
He'd stammered into the phone.
"But it's not good."
Elara's heart, a veteran of such calls, still gave a familiar, painful lurch. With her young, capable assistant, Liam, she was in the sanctuary's old Ford Ranger within minutes, the well-worn medical kit rattling in the back. They found the bobcat huddled against the cold metal of a guardrail, a small, broken heap of tawny, spotted fur. One of its hind legs was bent at an angle that defied nature, and a trickle of blood matted the fur near its ear. But it was the eyes that seized Elara's attention. Wide with shock and agony, they held a flicker of wild defiance that hadn't yet been extinguished.
"He's just a youngster,"
Liam said softly, his breath misting in the twilight.
"Barely a year old, I'd guess."
The capture was a tense ballet of nets and thick leather gloves. The bobcat, despite its injuries, summoned a surprising burst of strength, hissing and swatting with its good paws, a guttural growl rumbling in its chest. It was a sound of pure, undiluted wildness, a protest against the indignity of its situation. But pain and exhaustion soon won out. As Elara administered a sedative, she whispered the same words she whispered to every frightened creature that came into her care.
"It's all right now. You're safe. We're going to help you."
Back at the sanctuary's small clinic, their volunteer veterinarian, Dr. Ben Carter, confirmed their fears. The bobcat had a compound fracture of the femur, a severe concussion, and was dangerously underweight, suggesting he'd been struggling to hunt even before the accident. His chances, Ben admitted grimly, were slim.
"Rehabilitating an adult bobcat is a monumental task, Elara,"
he warned, his face etched with professional concern as he examined the X-rays.
"They're solitary, high-strung. The stress of captivity alone can kill them. If he survives the surgery, the real battle begins."
But Elara saw the flicker of defiance she'd witnessed on the roadside. It was a spark of will to live, and she was not one to let such a spark die out.
"We have to try, Ben. We have to give him a chance."
The surgery was long and arduous. Ben painstakingly set the bone, inserting a metal pin to hold the fractured pieces together. For the first 48 hours, the bobcat lay unnervingly still in the recovery enclosure, a silent, breathing statue of pain. Ilara sat with him for hours, a quiet vigil in the sterile room, speaking to him in a low, soothing murmur. She didn't know if her voice registered, but it was a ritual that calmed her own frayed nerves. She decided to name him Cedar, for the resilient trees that surrounded the sanctuary, trees that bent in the storm but rarely broke. Cedar's recovery was a slow, agonizing crawl. He refused to eat for days, turning his head away from the offered food with a sullen apathy that terrified Ilara. She tried everything: quail, rabbit, chicken, tempting him with the scents and textures of the wild. Finally, out of desperation, she sat on a stool just outside his enclosure, eating a piece of roasted chicken herself, talking to him about her day, about the weather, about the memory of her husband. It was on the third evening of this strange, one-sided dinner date that Cedar, with a great, shuddering effort, dragged himself to the bowl she had left and took a single, tentative bite. Tears welled in Ilara's eyes. It was a victory as monumental as any she had ever known. The following months forged an unlikely and unspoken bond between the woman and the bobcat. Cedar's leg began to heal, and with his returning strength came a cautious curiosity. He was, and always would be, a wild animal. He never welcomed her touch, never purred in the way a domestic cat would. But he began to associate Ilara with relief, with the clean scent of fresh pine shavings in his enclosure, the satisfying snap of bone in his food bowl, the low, steady cadence of her voice that signaled safety. He would watch her with an unnerving intensity, his tufted ears twitching, his golden eyes tracking her every move as she cleaned or brought him food. He learned the sound of her footsteps, the jingle of the keys she carried. In the quiet moments of the late afternoon, when the sun slanted through the high window of the clinic, he would sometimes sit near the wire mesh of his enclosure, not in a posture of aggression, but of simple observation, as if he were studying the strange, two-legged creature who had saved him. For Ilara, these moments were a precious gift. She saw in him not just an animal to be healed, but a personality, a quiet, stoic survivor who held his secrets close. Liam would often find her there, just watching Cedar.
You've got a soft spot for him, don't you?
He'd tease gently. Ilara would just smile.
He's a special case. He has an old soul.
As winter thawed into a wet, vibrant spring, Cedar was moved to a larger outdoor pre-release enclosure. Here, he could climb, leap, and stalk through the underbrush, rebuilding the atrophied muscles in his leg. He chased live mice with a ruthless efficiency that was thrilling and heartbreaking for Ilara to watch. It was the sign they were waiting for. He was ready. He was wild again. The day of his release was set for a cool evening in late May. Ben gave him a final checkup, declaring him fit and strong. The metal pin had been removed weeks earlier, and he now moved with a silent, fluid grace. The limp all but gone. The protocol was clear. A successful rehabilitation ended in release. It was the entire point of their work. But as Liam loaded Cedar's transport crate into the truck, a profound sadness settled over Ilara. It felt less like a success and more like a farewell. She had poured her heart into this animal, and now she had to let him go, to send him back to the indifferent world that had nearly killed him. They drove deep into the Mount Baker Snoqualmie National Forest, miles from any road or human habitation. The air was thick with the smell of damp earth and fir trees. When they reached the chosen spot, a clearing near a rushing creek, Alara knelt by the crate.
This is it, Cedar.
She whispered, her voice thick with emotion. She could see his eyes, gleaming in the dim light of the crate.
This is where you belong. Be smart, be safe, be wild.
Liam opened the crate door. For a long moment, Cedar didn't move. He stood at the threshold, one paw raised, sniffing the air, his ears swiveling to catch the myriad sounds of the forest. He took a hesitant step out, then another. He looked back, his gaze meeting Alara's for a fleeting, unreadable second. And then, as silent as a shadow, he melted into the deepening twilight of the woods. Alara stood there until the last trace of him was gone, until the only sound was the rushing creek and the cry of a distant owl. The silence he left behind was immense, a hollow space in her heart. The summer passed in a blur of activity. A new litter of orphaned raccoons demanded round-the-clock care. An eagle with a broken wing required delicate handling, and the sanctuary's finances needed their usual dose of creative magic to stay afloat. Life went on. Alara tried not to think about Cedar, but his memory lingered. Every time she passed his empty enclosure, she felt a pang of loss. She would scan the distant tree line, half expecting to see a pair of tufted ears, but there was never anything there. She told herself this was a good thing. It meant he was thriving, that he had successfully reassimilated into his wild world. Then, 3 months to the day after his release, it happened. Alara was locking up the main building for the night. A heavy fog had rolled in, blanketing the sanctuary in a damp, silent shroud. As she turned to walk toward her small cottage on the edge of the property, she heard a noise. A faint, scratching sound. It seemed to come from the front gate. Her first thought was a raccoon, or perhaps a stray dog. She walked toward the sound, her heavy-duty flashlight cutting a bright cone through the gloom. The scratching grew more insistent, accompanied by a low, plaintive cry that sent a shiver down her spine. It was a sound she knew. She reached the gate and shone her light upon the source, and her breath caught in her throat. Huddled at the base of the chain-link fence was a bobcat. It was gaunt, its ribs starkly visible beneath a coat of dirty, matted fur. Its eyes, which glowed a spectral green in the flashlight beam, were filled not with wild defiance, but with a desperate, weary recognition. He was thinner, weaker, but there was no mistaking him.
Cedar!
She breathed, her voice barely a whisper. He let out another cry, a sound that was half meow, half growl, and pressed his body against the gate. He had come back. He had walked for who knows how many miles, navigating by some internal compass of memory and instinct, and had returned to the only place he had ever known kindness. He hadn't returned to the wild. He had returned home. The sight of him was heart-wrenching. He was a portrait of failure. His failure to survive in the wilderness, and what felt like their failure to properly prepare him. Alara's heart broke for him. All the wildness and strength they had so carefully nurtured in him had been stripped away by the harsh realities of a life for which he was no longer suited. He had chosen. Working quickly, she and a bewildered Liam got him inside, settling him into a warm, quiet quarantine enclosure. He was exhausted and severely dehydrated, but free of any new injuries. He had simply failed to thrive. He didn't know how to hunt well enough, how to compete with other predators, how to be the solitary, phantom-like creature a bobcat is meant to be. His time in captivity, the very process that had saved his life, had irrevocably changed him. There was no question of releasing him again. To do so would be a death sentence. Cedar had made his choice clear, knocking on their door in the dead of night to plead his case. Now, they had to listen.
He's institutionalized,
Ben said a few days later, watching Cedar devour a meal with a hunger that was still raw.
It happens. He associates humans with food and safety. For him, the wild is the dangerous place, and this is his safe territory.
The decision ignited a flurry of new activity. Keeping a bobcat as a permanent resident required a different level of permitting from the state's Department of Fish and Wildlife. It required phone calls, paperwork, and inspections. It required a commitment, not for a few months, but for the rest of Cedar's life. Ilara pursued it with a dogged determination. This was her responsibility. This was her promise to the animal who had come back to her. While the permits were being processed, the sanctuary staff and a team of loyal volunteers began a new project: building Cedar a permanent home. It wouldn't be a cage, but a vast, sprawling enclosure, nearly an acre in size, fenced with high, secure wire that curved inward at the top. It encompassed a swath of natural woodland, complete with towering fir trees he could climb, dense thickets of salal he could hide in, and a section of the property's natural creek that was diverted to create a shallow, burbling stream. They built him climbing platforms high in the trees and a dry, insulated den that mimicked a natural rock cavern. Cedar watched the construction from his temporary enclosure, his head cocked with an intelligent curiosity. He seemed to understand that this flurry of noise and activity was for him. When the final gate was secured and the last permit was signed and filed away, the day came to move him into his new world. Ilara opened the door to his transport crate. This time, there was no hesitation. Cedar walked out into his new domain with the calm assurance of a king reclaiming his castle. He drank deeply from the stream, explored the scent of the ferns, and, with a powerful bunching of his muscles, scaled one of the large fir trees, settling on a high platform to survey his kingdom. He looked down at Ilara, and for the first time, she could have sworn she saw something akin to contentment in his golden eyes. Cedar settled into a comfortable routine, a life of semi-wild luxury. He was healthy and safe, but Ilara knew something was missing. Bobcats are solitary, but not pathologically so. They have their own complex social structures. He needed companionship. He needed one of his own kind. After months of searching and networking with other wildlife facilities across the country, Ilara found the perfect match. Her name was Aurora, a beautiful, silver-toned female from a sanctuary in Colorado. Aurora was non-releasable for a different reason. She had been illegally kept as a pet and declawed by her ignorant owners before being confiscated. Without her primary weapons for hunting and defense, she could never survive in the wild. She was gentle, a little timid, but possessed a quiet grace. Introducing 2 adult bobcats is a delicate and potentially dangerous affair. They began with scent-based introductions, swapping blankets and bedding from their separate enclosures for weeks, allowing them to grow accustomed to each other's smell without the stress of a face-to-face meeting. Next came visual contact through a secure mesh barrier. There was some initial hissing and posturing, the testing of boundaries, the ancient language of their species. But soon, curiosity overcame aggression. They would sit for hours, just watching each other through the wire. The day they were finally allowed into the main enclosure together was fraught with tension. Ilara and her team watched from a distance, hearts in their throats, ready with hoses and noisemakers in case of a fight. Aurora entered cautiously, her movements tentative. Cedar watched her from his favorite sunning rock. He descended slowly, approaching her not with aggression, but with a low, chuffing sound. A bobcat's friendly greeting. Aurora responded in kind. They circled each other, sniffing cautiously. Then, in a moment that made Alara's spirit soar, Cedar gently rubbed the side of his face against Aurora's. It was an act of acceptance, of welcome. The two outcasts had found each other. Their bond solidified over the coming months. They were a study in contrasts. Cedar, the stoic survivor, and Aurora, the gentle soul. But they were inseparable. They patrolled their territory together, napped in sunbeams, and groomed each other with a tender affection that was profoundly touching to witness. The following spring, the sanctuary was blessed with an unexpected miracle. Aurora gave birth to 3 healthy kittens in the secluded den they had built for her. The arrival of new life, born not in the harsh uncertainty of the wild, but in the safety of the sanctuary, felt like the ultimate validation of their work. The kittens were a chaotic, delightful bundle of spots and claws. Ilara and the staff watched them grow from a respectful distance, allowing Cedar and Aurora to be the parents. It soon became clear that the kittens had inherited very different personalities. 2 of them, a male and a female they named Thistle and Sable, were unequivocally wild. Thistle was bold and fearless, the first to pounce on the live prey introduced to them, his hunting instincts razor-sharp. Sable was shyer but equally competent, a silent shadow who followed her brother's lead. They shied away from the sight of humans, their eyes holding the same fierce, untamed spirit Alara had first seen in their father. But the 3rd kitten, the smallest of the litter whom they named Cricket, was different. He was his father's son in a much deeper way. He was more interested in watching the humans than in chasing squirrels. He would sit near the fence when Alara did her rounds, his head tilted in curiosity, much as Cedar had done years before. While his siblings practiced their stalking skills in the undergrowth, Cricket could often be found batting at a floating leaf in the stream, or simply observing the world from the safety of his mother's side. The wild call that sang in the blood of his siblings was a much quieter tune in him. When the time came, the decision was clear. Thistle and Sable were perfect candidates for release. After an emotional farewell, they were transported to a remote, protected wilderness area hundreds of miles away, given a chance to live the truly wild life their parents never could. Cricket, however, stayed. Like his father, he had chosen a different path. He remained in the large enclosure with Cedar and Aurora, forming a small, stable family unit. Years passed. Ilara's hair grew whiter, her steps a little slower, but her spirit remained as fierce as ever. Her days were still filled with the constant demands of the sanctuary, but her favorite moments were the quiet ones at the end of the day when she would sit on the bench overlooking the Bobcat enclosure. She would watch Cedar, now a mature, majestic male, lounging on his high platform, the undisputed lord of his domain. She would see Aurora, ever graceful, patiently grooming their son, Cricket, who had grown into a handsome young bobcat with his father's contemplative eyes. They were not zoo animals. They were not pets. They were something in between, a testament to the complex, often messy, but beautiful relationship between humans and the natural world. Sometimes, in the quiet of the evening, Cedar would come down from his perch and walk to the fence nearest her bench. He would sit there, watching her with those intelligent golden eyes. There was no fear in them, only a calm, quiet recognition that spanned the years. He had been lost, and he had been saved. He had been set free, and he had returned. He had come knocking on her door, a wild creature asking for sanctuary, and in doing so, had redefined the meaning of home for everyone at Blackwood Creek. Alara would smile, a deep, genuine smile that reached her eyes.
You're home, Cedar.
She'd whisper into the fading light.
You're home.
And the old Bobcat would blink slowly, a silent affirmation that she had heard him correctly all those years ago.